People are loving this conversation. Lakshmi, one of the questions for both of you, actually, we'll start with Lakshmi. Would love to hear your management philosophy and what you value the most.
Sure. I think I have a very rudimentary philosophy as a manager and a leader is like, what can I do to get things done? And as I spoke about in the beginning of the conversation, to me, it is about accountability and ownership towards delivering business value and outcome. And one of the things I always check in on myself when I'm making some decisions, when I'm prioritizing things, I prioritize customers over the company and the company over the team. And I think that goes a long way since I have that is one of the value systems I often check in, especially when you're making the hard decisions. I ask the question, am I making the decision that is right by the customer and right by the company and then right by the team? So these are the two philosophies that I truly value and I check myself on very often.
Awesome. Tim?
Very similar in terms of orientation of like, what's like the importance hierarchy look like, right? Like customer success will be a good barometer for your company's success. If the company's not successful, how is your team successful? If the team not successful, how are you successful? So on and so forth, right? I think, in similar light, in terms of philosophy, I'm a big believer in creating effectiveness. And I think one of those superpowers you start to grow and through this journey and continuously get better at is when you want to create effectiveness, how do you create a space that has some open and fluid communication channels, right? A lot of org structures are really, really all about some fluid communication channels, in my opinion. The other piece comes in with respect to, do you foster generally, like, do you look for and do you foster some natural curiosity? Because one thing I continue to learn, I'm still in learning mode. One thing I continue to learn is maintaining status quo is often not the right answer for your business. It might be the most comfortable place to be. So how do you get comfortable with being uncomfortable? Challenging yourself, challenging your team effectively, asking someone completely from the outside about their opinion on a thing, whatever it might be, but maintaining status quo. And so, again, depending on levels of leadership and whatnot, you look for aspects of like, were you a change agent for something? What'd you change? What was the outcome? What'd you learn? Was it better? Was it worse? Did you learn quickly? Did you repeat the same thing 10 times and get frustrated and nobody would, things like that, I think also show up in terms of, in the world and realm of philosophy.
Yep, no, that's great advice. Lakshmi, we also talked about two styles of leadership, especially if you're the technical IC type of a leader. You don't have a lot of business context, or you may not have the business statistics. So then how do you go about actually tying your work to the business impact?
Oh, sure. That's an amazing question. I think I would ask, why is that as an individual contributor, you don't have a business context? Because when you're doing something, ask the question, why? Why am I building something? Why do I need to ship this feature out? How is it going to help the customers? And I think it's become a very traditional and a common and quite something that we don't challenge the status quo. Like engineers are like, tell me what you want me to do and I will do it for you and I'll ship it for you.
Lakshmi, don't tell me what to do. Just don't tell me what to do, right?
There you go. Exactly, right?
Good luck.
I know. I can empathize with your frustration there, Tim. So I think we as engineers should start to ask the question, why? And that's a good barometer between product and engineering, right? When I coach my product and engineering team, I tell them the three things: why, what, and the how. When a product manager tells your team, hey, we are building this, product managers should say, why are we building this? How is it going to impact the business, the customers, the company? And then product and engineering should come together and talk about what are we going to build to solve the problem. And then engineers, you go ahead, put your heads down, decide about how you want to solve the problem. So now this is a partnership between product and engineering. Now, sometimes this partnership works well in some teams and sometimes it doesn't. So that's why the cross partners should be accountable when you don't get the why from the product as IZs, as engineers. Ask them, why am I building this product? Why I should be spending the next 4 sprints heads down on solving this problem. So that solves the question that you asked. So when you start asking these kind of questions, A, you're naturally empowered to make the right decision for the business. And B, you know what kind of business problems you're solving. And I would agree. I mean, as Tim says, it's a very hard thing to coach engineers. Any Scrum ceremony I step into, I observe this and I make a point to go back to the retro of the team and tell them, hey, ask the question of why. If you don't get why, encourage your product managers to talk about it.
Yep, absolutely. I think here there's also a question about what if I don't have access to these business statistics or like numbers? What do I do? Like, so I would probably say like, you have to ask. You will not get it unless you ask.
I'd say beyond it, mandate.
Mm-hmm.
Mandate, demand it, be demanding. It's okay. It's important. Be demanding. Like you need to have that access to that dashboard, you understand the context and be able to, and then the growth opportunity, be the bridge that creates some interchangeable context between product and engineering or business and technology, right? Show up that way, right? That in itself is it's a tremendous learning opportunity as you go through that and figure out, depending on the people and the things involved, that, you know, it's important.
Awesome. Maybe like Lakshmi, switching gears a little bit more. When you interview engineering managers, like, you know, the start of the leadership chain, so to speak, what patterns or anti-patterns have you noticed that either makes them a top choice or they have lost their chance?
Okay. Sure. We've talked about a lot of patterns in leadership interviews, and probably I want to make the best use of this time talking about anti-patterns because we need to learn from those anti-patterns. One of the common styles I see in early leaders is subtle leadership style. And let me explain what I mean by subtle leadership style. A number of early and mid-level managers, they talk about how they follow servant leadership and how they are the facilitator, but not the driver, right? I facilitate communication between product and engineering. And one of the other things I've heard is like, I'm the translator between business and engineering. And I facilitate Scrum ceremonies. Great, these are all great things, but how are you driving the outcome? Your company that wants to hire you does not want to be as a passenger, as a facilitator, as a coach, but want you to actually drive a business outcome. So I think it is important to use the right language and the right verbiage and showcase that, hey, I'm coming in to be on the front seat to deliver a business outcome for you. I think this is something I would truly encourage early and mid-level managers to think about it, to be the driver. And other most anti-pattern I see is like interviews are not just to impress the person on the other side, just talking about your success stories. We as leaders all know I've failed more times than I've succeeded. So we empathize with failures. So you don't have to like talk just about your success stories. Be vulnerable and bold and talk about your failure stories. Like how I went into a new company and like completely brought down the productivity in the first 2 months, that it took us 2x more time to ship than what it was when I came before, right? So those are the failure stories, and connect the failures to your learnings. And that goes a long way to show that you are bold enough to make changes. You're bold enough to make some difficult decisions, and you're good enough to get feedback and adopt the feedback as a learning. So yeah, in summary, I would say showcase be a leader, not just exhibiting or showcasing. You need to be the driver and showcase how you've driven on your previous roles, and also be bold and talk about failures. Everyone knows, like, I mean, all leaders know that we are not in this job without failing tremendously.
Absolutely. Tim, does that style change between P and EM? Like whether you're an EM or you're a vice president interviewing for a role?
Holistically, no. I think it's more around that scope of impact and or scope of influence has grown, right? So, you know, similar on like the anti-pattern front, one thing is whether it's eng manager, director, VP level, some things I try and hone in on and ask about is, you know, and try and get a feel for is like decision cycle time, right? What was a hard decision? What was the timing for it? What was your role, right? Who did you have to answer to? Was it your decision? Did you have to influence someone else to help make the decision? things like that, I think, start to show up, because I think one of those remember what I said, don't be the bottleneck, right? This natural inertia to get it right can actually come at a certain cost factor that may not be tolerable by the company. For example, like the wall clock ticks away faster than we ever have time to really, really make all the best decisions, right? And so if you're slow to come around, you want to second guess, third guess a lot of things, right? I think over time, you start to grow and get more and more comfortable in that space, right? Where being able to make a hard decision with some level of ambiguity is like one of those testaments to effective leadership, right? Because otherwise things stall out. And depending on what your scope of impact, scope of responsibility is, you can't stall anything. That is the hardest part. Don't stall things out, right? Because that can also show up in different ways. And ideally, like one of the favorite questions I like to ask is, tell me a decision that you made. You brought up the decision, you drove it, you made the decision that now when you look back, you completely regret.
Yep.
And I mean, quite often this stumps people, because to Lakshmi, they're very good talking about all the success. That's fine. I know your company. I know this. I'm going to back channel. I'm going to find out who you really are. Don't worry about it. Let's talk about the stuff you learned the most, right? How does that show up? And some people have shown up and says, you know, I've done really well. Really? Oh, interesting. Really? Not one thing, not one decision, not even a code commit, nothing. Okay, cool. So I think those things tend to show up.
Yep, absolutely. Lakshmi, one question here. How should interview feedback of not senior enough be interpreted?
That's a good question. I think I would go back and ask them, what do they mean by not senior enough, right? Because there are several aspects and elements to an interview. It's not that at this level, I don't think we're all walking into an interview and doing a terrible job right from 0 to 1. But there are certain aspects where we are extremely good at. That's a strength, and certain aspect where we are learning, and that's not some of our strong suit. So if you receive that kind of feedback, I will double down and go back and ask them, could you please share those areas where you see me not senior enough to actually do the job, so that you could actually learn from it and apply that feedback to your future interviews or to your career as well.
Yep. Tim, how do you demonstrate people management skills? If you're an IC, you're trying to get a management role.
Yeah, I think what a common denominator there is like, how have you shown up to help someone else type of scenario, right? That is a part of people management. How do you show up to get work done effectively, but you're doing it through the work of others, right? And you rise up. It's different types of others, right? In initial role, it might be people that are kind of like you, fellow engineers, and now you're not exactly a peer anymore, right? But as an individual contributor, it's like, how do you show up to help others out? And I think a big part of that individual contributor leadership part is bringing others along effectively. Because again, did you have a hard decision to help drive or help influence? If so, great. How can you help the other team members? Maybe they don't agree, maybe they don't understand, but how do you help them come along? Those are like some of the I want to say almost like skills that start to get built over time. You know, that one stands out quite common, I think, with ICs wanting to move into, and so one of the questions I always ask also is like, why do you want to do this? The hard way to make a buck. Are you sure? You really, really sure? Because your day is going to change dramatically. The types of conversations you weigh in on is going to change dramatically. Are you really, really sure? And, you know, people dabble, they get in and learn.
I think as ICs, you are doing a managerial role. If you actually deeply think about it, your staff developer and your principal developer are managing up. They are managing the director to tell them, like, what is the most important thing that you want to do for this sprint? What is the most important thing you can accomplish for this quarter? So you're doing already a splendid job of managing up, which is the most difficult thing to manage. You can manage down, you can manage your peers, but imagine if you can manage up, that elevates you to actually step up from an individual contributor to a manager.
Well, I'd say on that point, Lakshmi, I thank you for that. That's an awesome point. One of those anti-patterns in either track as you're rising up is telling your immediate boss or whomever exactly what they want to hear all the time. that typically does not show well with your team or your peers or those that are, looking up to you, right? And so, rising up is not about being the yes person, right? And keep in mind, like someone in my role, I create more work and thrash than anyone else in the organization because I got this idea. I have this. What about that? It just goes nonstop. And I always appreciate when someone meets me there and says, hold on, Tim, I got to push back. Here's the things that then I'm like, oh, okay, you got my attention. Right. And so don't have the tendency to say yes up all the time. That's not the best recipe for success.
Yeah. One last question. How important is it for candidates to ask questions at the end of the interview, or what should they actually ask? Lakshmi, quick note from you, and then Tim, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. That's a very favorite pet peeve for me, because I often see people coming in for an interview and they ask, like, what is the culture of your organization like, right? And the culture is such a subjective thing. What I appreciate as a culture in an org is something that you might not appreciate. So that has become like a very traditional trademark question, asking about culture of an organization. Instead, shift it. Ask them about what is your decision-making framework. When you are building a product feature that your engineers and product do not align with, how do you build momentum? How do you incentivize and motivate your engineers to move fast? How do you bring agility? So these kind of logical questions will actually help you learn their culture so that you're not asking them and getting a response that is true or untrue. So I would replace that with asking some logical questions and derive the culture aspect yourself.
Love it. Tim?
Yeah, plus 100. I think one question I always advocate for people to ask, and I think it's an important one because it can put the person interviewing you also in a good place of they need to be able to answer is, for example, I'm interviewing with someone for the role, and I'll ask, can you help me understand what does success look like in the first 90 days, first 180 days, end of year one for this role in this area or whatever it might be? That's your time to suss out and to assess, do they understand things well enough? Does that, so on and so forth. But also as someone who's interviewing, it really helps you understand and appreciate that how this person probably most likely approaches things. Right. And so again, asking questions about the business versus what languages do you program in? No, that's not a great question to ask during an interview. Do you really care? Should you care? I don't know, maybe not. But what are the things that keep me up at night from a business perspective and things like that? Come prepared with more questions than there's time for. Always a better recipe there.
Absolutely. Tim and Lakshmi, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful session. I could go on and on for hours.
That's it.